Why, when the world around them turned into a silent grave of ice and darkness, did Viking villages remain warm, alive, and breathing? Why did their fires keep burning when even the wind seemed to die? Why did their children sleep in comfort while storms tore the sky apart above their roofs? This is not just a story of survival. This is a story of defiance of humans who refused to bow to winter, even when winter came like a monster with teeth of frost and hands of death. The wind did not whisper in the Viking lands. It screamed. It clawed. It howled like something the storm did not arrive gently. It came like an execution. The sky darkened in the middle of the day. The wind rose without warning. The air sharpened, slicing through skin, through breath, through thought. Snow did not fall, it charged. Sideways. Violent. Endless. The world vanished in seconds. Trees disappeared. Paths were erased. The horizon died. And then the cold came. Not the normal cold. Not the familiar bite. But the kind that feels alive. The kind that searches for weakness. The kind that wants to finish the job. This was the winter that had killed villages before. The winter that had broken tribes. The winter people spoke about in whispers. The kind of cold that made even the strongest men doubt. And it was heading straight for the Viking settlement. Doors were sealed. Shutters closed. Animals driven inside. Fires fed. Children pulled close. The village compressed into itself like a heart under attack. No one spoke. No one joked. The air changed. Heavy. Alert. Ready. Because they knew. This was not an ordinary storm. This was a test. Outside, the wind howled like something wounded. It slammed into walls. It tore at roofs. It screamed through cracks. Snow buried doors. Ice climbed beams. The cold pressed inward, hunting for breath, hunting for heat, hunting for life. And inside the village, the fires burned brighter. People moved closer. Bodies touched. Shoulders pressed. Breath fogged the air. Animals shifted, snorted, steamed. The room filled with warmth, with sound, with life. The storm tried to invade, but every layer fought back. The walls held. The roofs held. The fire held. The people held. Hours passed. Then more. The night stretched. The dark thickened. The wind did not weaken. It grew angrier. Louder. More violent. Snow climbed higher. Ice crept deeper. The village disappeared under white. If you stood outside, you would think it was gone. Buried. Dead. But inside. Inside the heart of the storm. Life refused to die. A child cried. A woman sang. A man fed the fire. An elder spoke softly. Someone laughed. Someone whispered. Someone prayed. The storm could not silence them. The cold pressed harder. Frost formed on walls. Breath turned to steam. The air tightened. Fingers stiffened. The fire dimmed just for a moment and every head turned. Every body leaned in. Wood was added. Sparks rose. Flame flared. Relief surged through the room like blood. Because they knew what it meant. If the fire died, winter would win. And winter was desperate. The wind hurled itself again and again. The roof groaned. The walls creaked. Snow sealed every exit. The village was now a sealed chamber in a frozen world. No escape. No help. No retreat. Just endurance. Children were wrapped. Elders were supported. Animals were shifted. Food was shared. Water was guarded. No movement was wasted. No energy wasted. No heat wasted. Every breath mattered. Every spark mattered. Every heartbeat mattered. Outside, the storm killed everything it touched. Birds froze in mid-air. Animals collapsed. Trees cracked under ice. The land broke. The night swallowed the world. And still, the Viking village lived. Not because it was easy. Not because it was comfortable. But because it was ready. This was the moment everything had been built for. Every beam. Every layer. Every habit. Every story. Every lesson. Every scar. Every loss. Every preparation. All of it. For this. And as the storm raged, and the cold hunted, and the dark pressed in, the village did not fall. It did not panic. It did not fracture. It did not surrender. It endured. Hour after hour. Breath after breath. Flame after flame. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the wind weakened. The howling softened. The pressure eased. The violence faded. Winter pulled back. Not defeated. But denied. When morning came, the world outside was unrecognizable. Buried. Broken. Frozen. Silent. The storm had taken everything it could. Everything, except them. The doors were opened. Light spilled in. Cold rushed forward and was pushed back by warmth, by breath, by life. People stepped out. Snow to the knees. Ice on their beards. Steam in the air. And the village stood. Alive. Unbroken. Victorious. This was the night winter tried to kill them. And failed. And now we reach the final truth. Because surviving winter is one thing. But what the Vikings built, what they created, what they became, was something far more powerful. Alive, something angry. Snow did not fall gently, it attacked. It buried paths, swallowed doors, erased the world in white. The sun vanished for weeks, sometimes months, leaving only a pale, cold light that barely touched the earth. For most people, this kind of winter meant the end. Crops died. Animals vanished. Breath froze in the lungs. But in the heart of this frozen nightmare, Viking villages glowed. From far away, in the endless dark, a traveler would see its small golden dots of firelight flickering against the black. Smoke rising straight into the frozen sky. The sound of life. Laughter. The crack of wood. The low murmur of voices. Warmth. Impossible warmth. And this is where the mystery begins. Because nothing about their world should have allowed it. The ground was iron hard. The forests were silent. Rivers locked in ice thick enough to walk on. The sea itself became a grave of frozen waves. And yet, inside their villages, people lived. They cooked. They slept. They told stories. They survived. Not barely but fully. Winter, for them, was not just a season. It was an enemy. A hunter. A slow killer that crept into bones, stole breath, and turned mistakes into death. They had no modern insulation. No heaters. No glass windows. No concrete. No electricity. And yet, they endured. How? That question haunted everyone who ever came near their lands. Traders. Travelers. Enemies. Even kings wondered how these northern people did not vanish each winter like smoke in the wind. Many assumed it was luck. Others whispered about magic. Some believed the gods themselves protected them. But the truth was far more terrifying, far more brilliant, and far more deliberate. Because the Vikings did not hope to survive winter. They designed their entire lives around it. From the moment a child was born, winter was already shaping their future. The way they built. The way they worked. The way they ate. The way they slept. The way they thought. Everything, every choice, every habit, Every tradition was a weapon against the cold. And winter knew it. Winter came early in those lands. Sometimes without warning. One day green, the next day white. The sky would darken. The air would sharpen. And the world would begin to close. Paths vanished. The sea froze. The forests turned into traps. The cold crept into fingers, into ears, into souls. Many civilizations would have broken under that weight. Many did. But the Viking villages did not. They crouched low against the earth, like beasts that knew the storm was coming. Their roofs hugged the ground. Their walls embraced the heat. Their fires burned where the wind could not reach. Their homes were not built to impress. They were built to endure. Inside those walls, life continued while death waited outside. Imagine standing in that storm. Your face numb. Your eyes burning. The wind trying to tear the breath from your chest. And then, you open a heavy wooden door. The world changes instantly. The roar of the storm dies. Warm air wraps around you. The smell of smoke, food, and life fills your lungs. Shadows dance on the walls. People look up. Someone smiles. Someone moves closer to the fire. A child laughs. Outside, the world is trying to kill you. Inside, the village is alive. That contrast is not an accident. It is the result of generations of suffering, learning, failing, and adapting. Every mistake cost lives. Every lesson was paid for in blood. The Vikings did not guess how to survive winter. They earned it. Their ancestors had frozen. Their ancestors had starved. Their ancestors had watched families vanish in the snow. And those memories became blueprints. Pain became knowledge. Death became design. By the time these villages stood, winter was no longer a surprise. It was expected. Planned for. Welcomed, even because they were ready. And this is where the story truly begins. Not with heroes. Not with battles. Not with glory. But with a question, carved into ice, whispered by the wind, and answered by fire. Why didn't they freeze? Because in a land where winter ruled everything, the Vikings refused to surrender. And the secrets they built into their villages, hidden in walls, buried in floors, woven into daily life, would make their settlements some of the most unstoppable fortresses against cold the world has ever known. And the deeper you look, the more unsettling the truth becomes. They did not just survive winter. They mastered it. Winter did not attack the Viking villages by accident. It came with intent. It came with purpose. It came to test, to weaken, to break. And yet, every year, it failed. Because the villages were not just shelters. They were traps designed to capture heat, to suffocate wind, to confuse the cold itself. The first secret was invisible. You could walk through a Viking settlement and never notice it, but the earth beneath your feet was part of the defense. These villages were not built randomly. They were positioned with ruthless intelligence. Sheltered by hills. Shielded by forests turned away from the worst winds. Every longhouse, every storehouse, every animal pen was placed as if the land itself had been studied, interrogated, and forced to confess its weaknesses. The Vikings did not fight winter head-on. They made winter lose its way. Wind, their greatest enemy, was treated like a predator. And predators, they understood. So they denied it open paths. They curved their streets. They clustered their buildings. They blocked straight lines. When the wind rushed in, it was broken, slowed, scattered. It could not build speed. It could not sharpen its claws. By the time it reached the heart of the village, it was already wounded. And then there were the houses. They did not rise proudly into the sky like monuments. They crouched. Low. Heavy. Thick. As if pressing themselves into the earth for warmth. Their walls were not thin barriers, they were shields, layers of wood, turf, stone, and packed earth stacked with deliberate cruelty toward the cold. Each layer stole heat from the wind, trapped warmth inside, and forced winter to fight for every inch. These were not homes. They were bunkers. The roofs told the same story. Sloped, thick, heavy with turf. Not for beauty. For survival. Snow piled on top, and instead of being a burden, it became armor. A frozen blanket that sealed warmth inside. The very thing that killed others became their protection. Inside, the space was narrow. Tight. Intimate. No wasted air. No open heights for heat to escape. Warmth had nowhere to run. Smoke lingered. Heat lingered. Life lingered. The fire was not just in the center of the room. It was the heart of the village. Everything was arranged around it. Sleeping spaces. Work spaces. Eating spaces. Bodies pressed close. Breath warming breath. Heat shared, multiplied, protected. In winter, distance was dangerous. So they eliminated it. Even the floors fought for them. Packed earth. Layers of straw. Animal skins. Insulation born from necessity. The cold tried to rise from below, and the Vikings crushed it under weight, under warmth, under stubborn refusal. But perhaps the most terrifying truth of all, is that none of this was accidental. Every beam. Every wall. Every angle. Every placement. It was all memory. Memory of winters that had killed. Memory of children lost. Memory of elders who never saw spring. The villages were built from grief as much as from wood. And winter could feel it. When storms came, the world outside vanished. Snow erased the land. Darkness swallowed the sky. The sea went silent. And inside those villages, life shrank inward. The doors closed. The fires grew. The stories began. Voices rose against the howl. Laughter challenged the wind. Songs defied the dark. Outside, death waited. Inside, life sharpened its teeth. Because the Vikings understood something most people never did: winter is not just cold. It is psychological. It isolates. It weakens. It makes people surrender. So they built villages that did the opposite. Villages that forced togetherness. Villages that refused silence. Villages that turned isolation into unity. You could not be alone in a Viking winter. And that, more than fire, more than walls, more than roofs, was their greatest weapon. The cold could not separate them. The dark could not divide them. The storm could not silence them. And as the nights grew longer, and the sun disappeared, and the world froze solid, the villages endured. Not because they were lucky. Not because they were brave. But because every inch of their world had been shaped to kill the cold before it could kill them. Winter came to conquer. The villages were already waiting. And the deeper we go, the more disturbing the truth becomes, because these people did not just defend against winter. They studied it. They anticipated it. They outsmarted it. And what they did next, would turn their homes into living weapons against the frozen darkness. By all logic, by all reason, by every rule of nature, Viking villages should have gone silent in winter. Fires should have died. People should have weakened. The cold should have crept in and claimed everything. But it didn't. Because the Vikings did something most civilizations never dared to do. They turned life itself into insulation. Their homes were not empty shelters. They were breathing systems. Humans. Animals. Fire. Smoke. Body heat. All trapped together in a brutal, brilliant design that transformed suffering into survival. When winter arrived, the animals did not stay outside. Cows. Sheep. Goats. Even horses. They were brought inside or directly attached to living spaces. Their breath warmed the air. Their bodies radiated heat. Their presence changed the temperature. While other cultures separated themselves from animals, the Vikings embraced them. In winter, there was no line between human space and animal space. Warmth mattered more than comfort. Survival mattered more than smell. And the result was devastating to the cold. Each animal became a living furnace. Each breath a small defiance. Each heartbeat another enemy to winter. The air inside Viking homes was thick, warm, alive. Condensation on walls. Steam rising from bodies. The cold pressed from outside, but it could not penetrate the living mass within. They did not just use fire. They used everything that produced heat. And the fire itself was different. It was never allowed to die. The hearth was sacred. The flame was guarded. If a fire went out in winter, it was not an inconvenience, it was a crisis. Rekindling was slow. Dangerous. Sometimes impossible. So they fed it. Protected it. Treated it like a living being. Wood was hoarded. Dried. Hidden. Protected months in advance. Long before the first snow, the Vikings were already preparing to fight it. Because winter did not scare them. Running out of fire did. The smoke had a purpose too. It did not simply escape. It lingered. It soaked into walls. It filled cracks. It formed layers. Those layers became insulation. Over years, over generations, the very walls of Viking homes became blackened, sealed, hardened. The smoke became part of the structure. The house itself learned how to stay warm. Even the ceiling worked against the cold. Low. Heavy. Trapping heat. Forcing it downward. No wasted space. No escape routes. Warmth stayed where people lived. Where children slept. Where elders rested. Where stories were told. And then there was the food. Winter was long. Brutal. Merciless. Hunting was dangerous. Travel was deadly. So they did not rely on hope. They relied on preparation. Meat was dried. Smoked. Salted. Fish was preserved. Grains were stored. Everything was calculated. Every mouth was counted. Every portion measured. Starvation was not a surprise, it was an enemy they anticipated. They ate heavy. Fat. Protein. Foods that burned slow and warm inside the body. Food was fuel. And fuel was life. Even their clothing joined the war. Layer upon layer. Wool. Fur. Leather. Animal skins. Nothing wasted. Nothing thin. Their clothes were not fashion, they were armor. Armor against frostbite. Against numbness. Against death. Children were wrapped. Elders were protected. No one faced winter exposed. Because exposure meant disappearance. The darkness did not break them either. The nights were endless. The sky empty. The sun a memory. Many cultures would have collapsed under that weight. But the Vikings filled the dark with noise. Stories. Singing. Carving. Repairing. Planning. The mind was kept busy. The spirit was kept sharp. They did not allow winter to hollow them out. And this is the part most people never understand. The Viking village in winter was not a place of despair. It was a place of intensity. Life was closer. Louder. Hotter. More crowded. More alive. People argued. Laughed. Loved. Fought. Slept. Ate. Survived together. There was no space for weakness. No room for isolation. No escape from the tribe. Winter forced them into unity. And unity made them unstoppable. Outside, The cold killed silently. Animals froze where they stood. Trees split. Rivers died. The world became still. But inside the villages, life moved. Warmth flowed. Breath steamed. Hearts beat. The cold tried to suffocate them. They answered with fire, flesh, and fury. And the more winter pushed, the stronger their system became. Because what the Vikings built was not just shelter. It was a machine for survival. A machine powered by heat, by bodies, by memory, by refusal. And as the storms grew worse, as the nights grew longer, as the world outside became a frozen grave, the villages did not break. They hardened. And what comes next is where their genius turns almost ruthless. Because the Vikings didn't just defend against winter. They weaponized it. Most people try to escape winter. The Vikings did something far more dangerous. They used it. Where others saw death, they saw opportunity. Where others saw weakness, they saw advantage. Where others feared the cold, the Vikings learned to make it fear them. Because winter did not just protect their villages. It protected their power. The land itself became a barrier. Rivers froze into walls. Forests turned into traps. Mountains became knives. Snow erased paths, ice swallowed trails. Anyone who did not know the land would vanish in it. Armies slowed. Horses weakened. Enemies hesitated. Supplies ran out. And panic set in. The Vikings had planned for this long before the first snow ever fell. Their villages were placed where winter would do the killing for them. Narrow valleys. Elevated ground. Sheltered coves. Wind-shielded slopes. Approaches that looked simple in summer but became nightmares in winter. Slippery. Hidden. Treacherous. One wrong step meant broken bones. One wrong turn meant freezing to death. An enemy could see the village lights in the distance. And still never reach them. Snowdrifts hid pitfalls. Ice masked drop-offs. Frozen rivers cracked under weight. The Vikings knew where to walk. Where to stop. Where to wait. Their enemies did not. And the Vikings waited. They did not rush. They did not chase. They let winter weaken their prey. They let hunger sharpen. They let cold drain strength. They let fear do the work. By the time enemies reached their lands, they were already broken. Winter was their first line of defense. And it was merciless. Even their raids followed winter logic. They struck when others were weakest. When rivers were frozen and defenses slow. When people were hungry and tired. While the world hid indoors, the Vikings moved. Quiet. Efficient. Relentless. The cold did not slow them, it cleared the path. Because they had trained in it. Lived in it. Breathed in it. Winter did not belong to the world. It belonged to them. Their clothing, their boots, their weapons all adapted. Leather treated. Furs layered. Blades kept dry. Hands protected. They could fight when others could barely stand. They could march when others collapsed. They could see when others were blinded by snow. And that gave them an advantage no wall could match. Fear. Their enemies feared the cold. The Vikings were the cold. Villages that looked peaceful in summer became fortresses in winter. Quiet. Sealed. Alive inside, dead outside. Smoke rose. No doors opened. No sound escaped. The storm hid them. The dark protected them. And anyone approaching did so blindly. Winter erased tracks, covered movements. Swallowed evidence. The Vikings could move unseen. Appear without warning. Vanish without trace. The land became their cloak. And inside the villages, nothing was wasted. Snow was packed against walls to seal cracks. Ice was used to store food. Frozen ground preserved supplies. Cold became a tool, not an enemy. They understood something deeply unsettling. Winter is not a season. It is a system. And they mastered it. While other people cursed the cold, the Vikings thanked it. Because winter made their world smaller. And a smaller world is easier to control. Enemies could not travel easily. Trade slowed. News died. The Vikings became isolated, and in that isolation, they became untouchable. No help was coming. No rescue was possible. No reinforcements would arrive. Winter cut the world apart. And in that silence, the Viking villages thrived. They told stories of gods who walked through snow. Of monsters that hunted in blizzards. Of warriors who never felt cold. And those stories were not just myths, they were training. Psychological armor. Children grew up believing winter could be faced. That fear could be mastered. That the dark could be challenged. They were not raised to survive winter. They were raised to dominate it. And that is why their villages did not just endure the cold. They ruled over it. The storm howled. The ice crept. The night closed in. And the Viking villages remained. Warm. Alive. Unbroken. But the greatest secret, the one that ties everything together, is still waiting. Because there is one final truth about how these people defeated winter. And it is the most dangerous of all. By now, the secret was no longer in the walls. Not in the roofs. Not in the fires. Not even in the animals or the land. The real secret was in their heads. Because winter does not just kill the body. It hunts the mind. It whispers. It isolates. It convinces. It tells people they are alone, that they are weak, that they will not last. It turns silence into pressure. Darkness into weight. Cold into despair. And most people surrender long before their bodies fail. The Vikings did not. They refused. From childhood, they were trained to see winter not as punishment, but as a test. A proving ground. A season where weakness was burned away and only the strong remained. They did not ask, will we survive? They asked, who will become stronger? That difference changed everything. When the sun disappeared, they did not mourn it. They filled the dark with purpose. Hands were always moving. Tools were always in use. Wood was carved. Weapons were repaired. Nets were mended. Clothes were sewn. Nothing was idle. Idleness invited fear. So they killed it. When the wind screamed, they did not hide from it. They challenged it with laughter. With songs. With stories of gods who laughed at storms and warriors who walked through fire. The noise was not entertainment. It was resistance. Silence was dangerous. Noise meant life. And they understood something terrifyingly well. If the mind survives, the body will follow. They told stories of Ragnarok, the end of the world, where even the gods would die in fire and ice. Think about that. A culture raised on the idea that even the gods could fall, and still they faced winter without flinching. Because if the end was inevitable, then fear was pointless. And if fear was pointless, then action was everything. Winter could not threaten people who had already accepted death. Children grew up hearing about heroes who froze, who starved, who bled, and kept fighting. Not as tragedies. As examples. Winter was not portrayed as a monster to hide from, but as a battlefield to step onto. And so they did. Every winter was a campaign. Every storm was a trial. Every night was a challenge. And the village stood together through it all. Elders taught. Warriors listened. Children watched. Knowledge passed hand to hand, breath to breath. There was no separation. No hierarchy when it came to survival. Everyone mattered. Everyone contributed. Everyone belonged. Belonging is powerful. Belonging keeps people alive. A man alone in winter dies. A woman alone in winter disappears. A child alone in winter is lost. But a tribe endures. That is why Viking villages did not fracture under pressure. They tightened. They closed ranks. They became smaller, stronger, louder, hotter. They did not spread out. They pulled in. Like a fist. Like a shield. And the cold could not pry them apart. When food grew low, they shared. When someone weakened, they carried. When fear crept in, it was challenged. No one was allowed to vanish quietly. No one was allowed to be forgotten. Winter wanted isolation. The Vikings gave it unity. And that was fatal to the cold. Because winter feeds on separation. And the Vikings starved it? This is where the story reaches its edge. Because by now, you should understand something deeply unsettling. The Viking villages were not warm because of fire. They were not alive because of walls. They were not strong because of design. They were unstoppable because they refused to break. Winter did everything it could. It froze the land. It killed the light. It silenced the world. It tried to erase them. And the Vikings answered with community. With noise. With purpose. With fire in their bellies and steel in their eyes. They did not wait for spring. They defied winter itself. And now we are standing at the edge of the climax. Because everything you have heard so far, the design, the heat, the animals, the land, the mind, was preparation. What comes next is the moment when winter hit its hardest. And the Vikings proved, once and for all, that they would not be conquered. Not by armies. Not by hunger. Not by darkness. And not by the cold.